On April 19, 1985, Joanna Yeates was born into a family consisting of David and Teresa Yeates. Her birthplace is Anfield, Hampshire, around 2 hours' drive away from London. She also had a reasonably cozy childhood. She got along well with her parents, particularly her mother, who described Joanna as her best friend. Her parents truly made every effort to provide her with the greatest upbringing possible. She attended this supposedly elite, selective private school called Emily's School, and Joanna utilized her education to the fullest. She was a standout student who eventually attended college to earn a degree in landscape architecture. The University of Gloucestershire also awarded her a postgraduate diploma in landscape architecture. She was 23 years old by the end of 2008, and things were going great for her. She worked for a company she loved and loved her job. She was employed by Highland at Godiva, an organization that focuses on urban and landscape architecture. Additionally, she met a 25-year-old man called Greg Riordan, who was employed as an architect at the same company. At work, they struck up a conversation. They simply clicked so well together that a relationship developed, and together they were incredibly happy. Joanna's folks cherished Greg. They believed that their partnership was fantastic. Joanna was simply ecstatic. For her, everything was going incredibly well. She was just described as a really upbeat, joyful, vivacious, kind girl that got along well with everyone in general. That's just the type of person she is. She was characterized as an adventurous, self-assured girl who simply lived life to the fullest. Joanna and Greg were employed by a company that moved to Bristol by the end of 2009. Joanna and Greg both enjoy their jobs for this reason. They had a great time at their employer. Thus, they made the joint decision to relocate to Bristol. They were so relocating to Bristol. They could not have been more delighted about moving in together in Bristol. The partnership was thriving. Like this relationship was Joanna's last. Greg expressed his belief that he and Joanna will eventually tie the knot, which is why they were eager to move in together. Joanna was eager to get this apartment decorated with her. Like when you move in with your guy, it's really thrilling. However, they weren't merely sharing a residence. They were going to this new city as well. It was simply a very momentous and thrilling period in their lives. Joanna accepted a job offer from a new architectural firm shortly after they moved, and she started working there. Soon afterward, in October 2010, Sarah and Greg made the decision to switch apartments. They then relocated to 44 Canyon Road, which was located in Bristol's affluent Clifton neighborhood. The flat was on the ground floor. Although it was a component of a residential complex, they never had to enter the building itself because they had a street-level entry. Thus, on December 17, 2010, Greg leaves in the morning to spend Christmas with his family in Sheffield, and Joanna, following work, goes out to the Bristol pub to have a few drinks with some of her coworkers. She continues by telling them how she is looking forward to the next weekend because it will be her first time spending a weekend at the apartment by herself without Greg. She simply doesn't seem excited about it. However, they were planning to throw a small Christmas party the following weekend. Joanna cherished Christmas to the extent that it was her most cherished season. There was a lot of snow, Bristol in this specific year as well. Thus, there was a distinct Christmas vibe. She so had plans to occupy her time that weekend by going shopping for last-minute Christmas gifts and creating some treats. Joanna departs the pub at approximately 8 p.m. once the drinks are finished, and usually walks home. It would take about 25 minutes. On the way, though, she makes a few stops. She makes her first stop at a Waitrose, a UK supermarket, where she browses around, doesn't make any purchases, and then leaves. She then makes a call to her friend Rebecca Scott on her way from Waitrose to her next destination, and they plan to meet on Christmas Eve. She then makes stops at a Tesco Express in Clifton Village, where she purchases a pizza made with Tesco's best mozzarella, tomato, and basil pesto. She is captured on camera leaving the Tesco at 8:40 p.m. She then makes a brief detour at Bargain Booze, a neighboring off-license, where she purchases 2 bottles of cider before heading home, where she is thought to have arrived at around 9 o'clock in the evening. Greg is attempting to reach Joanna from Sheffield in the meantime. He attempts to call her twice, once on her cell phone, and once on the landline at the apartment. He is texting her a few times. However, she doesn't return any calls or texts. When he still hasn't heard from her by roughly 10:20 p.m., he texts her once again. Once more, though, Joanna doesn't respond, and at this time, he isn't too concerned because, in my opinion, Joanna wasn't really that concerned about checking her phone. Thus, it wasn't all that significant. However, he keeps attempting to get in touch with her for the remainder of the weekend. I call her, send her SMS, etc. And for the entire weekend, Joanna does not respond to him. On Sunday, he had time at the 19th and returns home at approximately 8 p.m. He also senses that something is off as soon as he enters the apartment. Joanna is nowhere to be found. On the kitchen counter, there's an open bottle of cider. It appears that no one has been taking care of the cat, and the trash hasn't been removed since he departed. Greg is first a little miffed that the cat appears to have been neglected because, she left the house in this condition. She hasn't informed him that she will be leaving. She hasn't given the cat any attention at all and hasn't responded to him at all during the weekend. However, he soon realizes that her keys, wallet, and purse are still at the house, and he knows something is wrong. He's making an effort to maintain his optimism. He speculates that she might have been locked out of the house and unable to get in touch with him. It certainly defies logic, as she would have found a method to get in touch with him or hire a locksmith to get entry into the residence. However, I believe he's just trying to maintain his optimism. You don't want to start by picturing the worst-case situation, do you? Thus, he extends it till 9 p.m., due to 9 p.m. is the typical time that he and Joanna watch The Apprentice. However, it is 9 p.m. Joanna never returns home. Sir, he's still not heard from her. He calls her mobile phone, and at that moment, he hears it ringing inside the apartment. He follows the sound and finds her phone in her coat pocket. It seems as like something is amiss. He begins phoning her relatives and friends. Nobody has heard from her, nor has anyone seen her. Thus, he calls the police at 12:45 a.m. and reports Joanna missing. Which may I simply include here. For example, why did it take him so long to dial 911? As if at 9 o'clock at night, he'd noticed she was gone. And it wasn't until 12:45 in the morning that he called the police. It had been a silent weekend from her end. Arrives at home. The cat hasn't been fed or the trash removed for the entire weekend. She has everything at home. Everything. Wallet, keys, and bag. By 9 p.m., he realizes. He doesn't call the police until 12:45 a.m., but her phone is still there, and no one has seen or heard from her. I understand that each person handles situations differently, and you want to be positive and think the best of things, but really I find that rather puzzling. But let me start with that. As a result, the police show up at the apartment rather quickly. Joanna's parents also drove straight to the Bristol apartment in the middle of the night, after learning from Greg that Joanna was missing. They began searching the apartment while the police questioned Greg and other building occupants as well as neighbors. While the police carry out their investigation, Joanna's parents discover in the apartment a receipt for the Tesco pizza Joanna had purchased. Additionally, it indicates that the pizza was bought around 8:40 p.m. on December 17th, indicating that she arrived home that evening and must have vanished thereafter. However, they discover nothing of this pizza as they scour the flat further. Nothing, the pizza box, the wrappings. You would assume that if she had eaten the pizza, the box, the wrappings, the trash from it, or something else, would have been in the apartment's unemptied trash can or somewhere nearby. Given that the receipt is in the apartment, you would assume that if she hadn't eaten the pizza, it would be in the fridge or freezer. She has everything in the apartment, but this pizza is nowhere to be found. It's just a really strange circumstance. A search is initiated. The parents of Greg, Joanna. The cops are all out looking for Joanna, David, and Teresa. Anywhere that comes to mind. They're looking for anything too. Any information about Joanna is being sought after. The pizza box, even. At this time, in an attempt to gather leads, her friends and relatives also end up creating websites and utilizing social media. Thus, they're attempting to gather as much information as they can about Joanna by using sites like Facebook and YouTube. The parents of Joanna and Greg, David and Teresa, issue a public plea for her safe return on December 21st. Her boyfriend, Greg, added another press conference the next day, December 22nd, saying, "I really want her back," during a police press conference. "I believe that we would be partners in life. My future belonged to her. We were supposed to spend our first Christmas together this year. It always means a lot to a boyfriend to spend it with her family, and that was my plan." Joanna's father, David, stated during a second press conference with Sky News and BBC News the following day, December 23rd, that he believed Joanna had been abducted after returning home to her apartment. "She would not have left all of these things behind to walk out on her own, in my opinion, and be whisked away somewhere else." As the inquiry continued, forensics showed no indications of a fight or forced entrance, which gave police reason to think Joanna was acquainted with her doctor. Greg, her lover, had, however, been eliminated as a possibility. As the days passed, no one could figure out who this could have been. Then on Christmas Day, at approximately 9 in the morning, a couple was strolling their dog along Longwood Lane, which is roughly 3 miles or 4.8 kilometers from Joanna and Greg's apartment. There, in the snow, they discovered a completely dressed body, which at this stage the police assumed to be Joanna Yates's. Joanna had not been seen for 8 days, and her body was frozen solid, so the person-autumn exam was going to take a little longer to finish. When it first started on December 26th, investigators thought that she had frozen to death because there were no obvious injuries. I'm not sure if this is because of how frozen her body was or what the situation was, but after her body was found, authorities held a press conference and requested anyone who knew anything about her death to come forward. Additionally, they stated that the investigation was looking for the driver of a four-wheel drive vehicle with a light color to come forward and be questioned. Joanna's brother Chris, boyfriend Greg, parents David and Teresa, and other family members went to the location where her body was discovered the following day, December 27th. They also placed flowers. In addition to helping to authenticate that the body indeed belonged to Joanna, they also placed a picture of Joanna from her graduation day. The police later disclosed that Joanna had been strangled to death on December 28th. 43 distinct injuries were discovered on her body, proving that she had clearly suffered a great deal before passing away. She was injured on her neck, body, arms, and head, and among these wounds were cuts, bruises, and even a nose fracture. Thus, it seemed to suggest that her demise was gradual and agonizing. They also showed that one of her breasts was visible because her top had been pulled up over her bra. Though this does not necessarily imply that there was not a sexual motive behind the matter, authorities did not think there was one for the murder. Do you understand what I mean? It only implies that, at the time, they didn't believe it to be the case. They also discovered that she had not eaten the pizza she had bought from Tesco that evening, and that she had been slain several days before her body was discovered. And because of this, detectives theorized that her attacker had actually stolen the pizza. It's rather unsettling to consider that someone might kill someone and then claim to have had a frozen pizza and think, "Oh, that's convenient. I mean, I just killed someone, so let me take that home for supper tonight." People are overly prepared. Naturally, in light of these discoveries, the inquiry was renamed Operation Bride and expanded to include a total of 80 personnel, 30 of whom were detectives. And the head of it was Detective Chief Inspector Phil Jones, a senior member of the Major Crime Investigation Unit of the Avon and Somerset Constabulary. It was also a very thorough inquiry. In fact, it turned into one of the largest investigations in the history of the constabulary. According to Phil Jones, they were receiving thousands of calls and letters, and they were pursuing and following up on every lead and outlet that was available to them. They combed through more than 100 hours of CCTV. Their haul was 293 tons. That's 293,000 kilograms of trash that Joanna and Greg were going through from the region around their apartment. A total of 60,000 pounds was up for grabs for any information that resulted in a conviction. 10,000 pounds from Crime Stoppers and 50,000 pounds from the Sun. Then, 5 days after Joanna's body was discovered on December 30th, police detained Christopher Jefferies, a 65-year-old man. In addition to being Joanna's landlord, he occupied the apartment right above hers. In addition, they seized his vehicle, a silver Cross-Led, which had been parked on the street in front of the house after they had arrested him. Chris, a retired educator, participated in the administration of a neighborhood watch program. He was also called a pillar of society and an eccentric. And that's where he first focused his attention, when he said he'd observed Joanna leave her apartment while conversing quietly with two other people, approximately 9 o'clock at night, the evening before she vanished, thus December 17th. And with that, he would be the last person to see Joanna alive. Furthermore, this information was somehow released. It reached the media and the general population. He so began to backtrack and claim, no, I can't say that I actually did see Joanna that night, when he began to be questioned by the media about seeing Joanna and what transpired. I suppose that was just a peculiar circumstance. However, they also discovered that on December 17th, the day Joanna vanished, Chris had actually assisted Greg in jump-starting his car a few hours before Greg departed for Sheffield. Thus, he was aware that Joanna would spend the weekend by herself at home. Thus, it is true that they detained him on December 30th. When they brought him in for interrogation, there was absolutely no concrete proof that he was connected at all. Since there is absolutely no proof, the police are granted a further 12-hour extension to continue questioning him. This seems to be their attempt to get a confession out of him. And in the interim, following their receipt of this extension, they receive a call from a neighbor, someone who resides in the same apartment building as Chris and Joanna. And this neighbor says, "Hey, I actually saw Chris move his car on the night of the murder for a couple of hours," which is kind of weird, obviously. However, authorities don't have any further leads that seem promising. They don't have any more leads, evidence, or suspicions. As a result, they're merely clinging to whatever thin straws they can find. But in all, they detained Chris for 2 days. They asked him a lot of questions. They conducted a house search. He lacked a computer, electronics, phone, or anything similar. They were essentially looking through his residence for any clues. A pizza box, for example. Nothing was discovered when they searched his automobile. Thus, on January 1st, they granted him bail and threw him out of the case. The trouble is, the damage was already done when they freed him. The media had gone completely insane when his name was made public as a suspect. They were severely abusing him and severely damaging his reputation. It was as harsh as the UK media, on a whole other level. It's astounding. It's kind of ridiculous if you're a killer. I mean, you sort of deserve it if you're a proven murderer or whatever. However, this man was only brought in to be questioned. There was not a shred of proof against him. However, as a result of his questions, the UK media said, "This guy seems to have been demonized for simply being a nice guy and friendly guy. He helps Greg with his car, and God forbid he's just trying to be a nice neighbor." Then he makes an effort to provide any information he may have to the police. And the British media was like, wow, this guy is the biggest jerk, since he had to sue 8 different newspapers and demand that they all issue public apologies for their stories about him. They also owed him damages, as they ought to have done. Additionally, the police were required to issue a public apology for the grief that was caused to him during the inquiry. However, in all honesty, his name never ought to have been publicized in the first place. In any case, the police are following all leads and are carrying out their investigation. Every day, more witnesses come forward. A woman comes forward to clarify that, in fact, she was at a party at the apartment building across the street from Joanna and Greg's. About 9 o'clock at night, she went outside to enjoy a cigarette. There were about 20 individuals at the party. Then, from the direction of Joanna's apartment, she heard a lady screaming. Because it was a Friday night, she didn't give the shouts much thought at the moment she heard them. During the holidays, everybody were drinking and having fun. She simply didn't give it any thought. However, after learning about Joanna's death and disappearance in the days that followed, she reasoned that perhaps it should be brought up with the authorities. All 20 attendees of the party were questioned by the police, and they obtained the DNA samples of every man present, but nothing significant came of it. "Help me," cried a woman who lived behind Joanna and Greg's flat, was heard by another neighbor. He was unable to recall the precise moment he had this or anything else. However, after learning of Joanna's murder, he felt it was important to bring it up. The idea that this case might be related to other unresolved instances was also investigated by the investigators. Thus, they investigated the 1974 death by strangulation of 20-year-old Glennis Carruthers at Clifton's. They investigated the case of 35-year-old Melanie Hall, who went missing from Bath in 1996 following a meetup with friends at a bar. And she was murdered. Her body wasn't found in South Gloucestershire until 2005, 13 years after it happened. They also investigated the 2009 York disappearance of 35-year-old Claudia Lawrence. Melanie's case was the most similar to the others because both ladies had similar ages and parents, and they had both vanished after going home from social gatherings. However, like before, not much really came of this. Simply said, police were incredibly tiresome. There were still a ton of unanswered questions, and every single possibility was leading to dead ends. It was a mystery to the police even when she was killed. Any time between Friday the 17th and Sunday the 19th may have been the possibility. There were no traces of forced entry, so they had no idea why her body was hidden so badly and why she knew her killer. They also had no idea what the deal was with the Tesco pizza. Was she able to let them in? Was there a key with this person? When she returned home that evening on the 17th, was this person already waiting in her apartment? It seemed like they were no closer to locating her killer, since there were just so many unanswered questions. Police increased their patrols in the Clifton neighborhood by January 2nd, and they advised ladies not to walk home alone after dark. Additionally, they asked residents of the Clifton area to lock up their houses at night. Police also recreated Joanna's final movements prior to her death in collaboration with the BBC show Crime Watch. Police launched a Facebook campaign to collect leads 2 days later on January 4th. It functioned much like a Facebook advertisement, letting users message users instead of requiring them to phone whenever they had a lead, piece of information, or anything similar. And by January 5th, the following day, this Facebook campaign had received over 250,000 views. And by January 5th, a great number of people had also sent in messages. Additionally, lead detective Phil Jones declared that upon finding Joanna's body, one of her gray ski socks was gone. Since they were unable to locate the sock anywhere, it appeared that the murderer had also taken it. Additionally, he stated that although they had already established over 1,000 lines of investigation, they were continuously expanding their search. They were still determined to investigate every single nugget of data, piece of proof, and lead they could find. Authorities conducted a thorough investigation and were committed to finding Joanna's killer. However, it resembled trying to find a needle in a haystack. Furthermore, even in the event that they located this needle, there would still be no proof. They're interrogating patrons of the Bristol Ram pub. On Longwood Lane and Kane Road, they are stopping cars. They truly are putting all of their effort into it. They even hired a private company that specializes in conducting forensic analysis for criminal investigations. They use a technique known as DNA sense, which basically enhances and purifies DNA. This was very helpful in this case because, as was evident from the fact that Joanna's body was completely frozen, it was difficult to obtain any DNA evidence from her. However, they were able to extract some DNA from beneath her garments using this DNA scientific equipment. They weren't sure if the DNA was touch DNA, saliva, or semen, but it was DNA nonetheless. Additionally, the fact that it was discovered beneath her clothing provided investigators with additional context for the murder. Obviously, they didn't think it was a crime with a sexual motive up until this stage in the inquiry. However, the discovery of the DNA under her clothing suggested that it might have been, and the MP for Bristol at the time even stated that she would back police collecting DNA from every man in the city if they believed it would be helpful. This was a significant case. In an attempt to piece together Joanna's location on the evening of December 17th, Investigators even began monitoring the activities of a number of local registered sex offenders. However, the police made their breakthrough at last. The BBC's Crime Watch featured a live appeal from Joanna's parents, and shortly after this advertisement, they received a call from someone accusing Vincent Tabak, a 32-year-old guy. Vincent was Dutch by origin. He was an architectural engineer who relocated to Bath, UK in 2007. He was born in the Netherlands in 1978 and had 5 siblings, 3 sisters and 1 brother. 2008 was the year he moved, and during his brief online dating career, he met Tanya Masson, who ended up being his first committed girlfriend. It was said that they were a very happy couple who moved to Bristol in June 2009, apparently relocating into the same building as Joanna. He was so clearly already on the police's radar. After all, he shared a building with Joanna, but he had been eliminated as a suspect. Thus, on December 20th, they questioned him for the first time because, they questioned all of Joanna's neighbors and everyone who lived in the building where she did. When the police questioned him, he denied knowing anything and claimed not to even know Joanna's identity, despite the fact that they shared an apartment building. To be honest, the police didn't find this strange, as they themselves don't know anyone who lives in their building. On December 23rd, they also went and searched his flat, which was another standard procedure. All the residents living in the same building as Joanna are being searched. Upon searching his apartment, they turned up nothing. On December 23rd, he and his girlfriend Tanya depart to celebrate Christmas with Tanya's family in Cambridge on the same day. On December 24th, however, they call him the following day, and once more it's simply another ordinary occurrence. All they're attempting to do is piece together his exact location on the day Joanna vanished, and he declared to them how awful he was. Not until 2 in the morning, when he had to depart, must go and retrieve Tanya, his girlfriend, from a work party. He was therefore essentially eliminated as a suspect at that point. Additionally, I believe that this was somewhat related to the fact that at this time, Chris Jefferies was the main subject of their inquiry. Vincent was granted permission to depart from the nation. On December 28th, he departed the nation to visit and spend some time with his family in the Netherlands. Naturally, Chris Jefferies was taken into custody on December 30th, a few days later. Recall that during his detention, a cohabitant of Joanna's in the same building called the police to report that Chris's car was still there the night Joanna vanished, indicating a homicide. And surprise, surprise, it was Vincent who did that, attempting to shift the blame, divert attention, and get someone else arrested. He was even willing to put an innocent man in jail for this. However, after receiving this call from Vincent, the police were actually moved to consider going to speak with Vincent to see if he had any further information. Thus, 2 officers take off for Amsterdam on December 35th in order to question him. And Vincent's experience is not good with this, like everything about it. His attempt to put Chris under the bus backfired so badly that they spent almost 6 hours questioning Vincent, first only seeking details on Chris Jefferies and his circumstances. Jefferies, Chris, calm if they have no bearing on the issue. However, Vincent started acting so strangely during the interview that people were staring at him strangely. Yes, John, he is far too infatuated with the forensic examination of this probe. Then, from the night of the murder, his story diverges. Naturally, at first, he claimed that he didn't go out until he had to go pick up his girlfriend Tanya from a work party at 2 in the morning. However, it all changes in this interview, as he claims that he went out twice before going to pick Tanya up. He claims he went out once to go to the grocery and once more to go snap pictures. Then in this interview, he reveals at random, completely unprompted, that he had walked all the way over Joanna's path. Joanna was unharmed. He conversed with Chris Jefferies. He was talking to Chris when he inadvertently stepped into Joanna's corridor. I'm not sure how the logistics work. I don't know why he brought this up on his own initiative without prompting me. He was simply so weird to bring it up. I tend to sabotage myself. For him, the entire interview felt like a trash fire, but it was a triumph for the inquiry. He was plainly worried when the cops requested a sample of his DNA and fingerprints during the questioning, since he was acting strangely. However, after he provided the authorities with the DNA and fingerprint sample, they proceeded to send them out for analysis as they clearly possessed the DNA that was discovered on Joanna's body. Consequently, they have a reference point for this DNA. And then Vincent and Tanya went back to Bristol on January 2nd, not too long after that. And it seems like the entire building has been sealed off for investigation, so they are unable to go back to that apartment. So they depart and lodge with some pals. A woman calls in names during the BBC Crime Watch appeal that airs shortly after that. I read an article where the police stated that they would not confirm if the woman had implicated her boyfriend in Vincent's death. Vincent and I don't want to assume who called up to accuse Vincent. Thus, the results of the DNA test also eventually surface. Additionally, it matches Vincent Tabak. His DNA is visible under her knees, on her trousers, and on her breasts. Additionally, there is a 1 in a billion possibility that Vincent is not the owner of this DNA. Therefore, it's not a him, like Fat Chance. And on January 20th, he is taken into custody for Joanna Yeates' murder. He was held for 96 hours and questioned by the police, but he refused to comply. He was just saying no comment, no remark in answer to all of those inquiries. And a feedback. He did attempt to claim that the scientists had been paid to set him up, that the labs had erred in the DNA testing, or that they were insecure. Come on, man, why would they try to set you up? I mean, really, who are you? Subsequent to his apprehension, they conducted additional searches of his apartment and vehicle, discovering remnants of Joanna's blood in the vehicle's boot. Additionally, they discovered fibers on Joanna's body that suggested she had touched both Vincent's silver rental car and his black clothing. Then, on February 8th, while he was being held on remand, he went to speak with a chaplain. Additionally, he thought that the chaplain was not allowed to tell anyone about this chat because it was private, which was untrue. He so confesses to killing Joanna during this chat. "I have something to tell you," he says as he enters. "You will be shocked by it." He then expresses regret and acknowledges the issue. However, on May 5th, he appears for a hearing and enters a plea of manslaughter rather than murder. However, the Crown really rejects this plea. Then, on October 4th, 2011, his trial was scheduled to take place at the Bristol Crown Court. Prior to the trial, authorities were still attempting to obtain additional information in order to ascertain his motivation, among other things, and they left Sasha's car and apartment again. Additionally, they looked through his computer, and to put it mildly, his search history was unsettling. They discovered that he was obsessed with graphic pornography that showed women being stuffed into birds and dehumanized, shackled, and gagged. It is also concerning since he was particularly fixated on men violently strangling women during sexual encounters. Think about Joanna, who died from strangulation. Additionally, they discovered that when he was in California on a business trip, he had made contact with multiple prostitutes to arrange meetings in the months preceding Joanna's slaying. And among all of these items, they discovered 145 pornographic pictures of kids. 3 pictures in particular caught our attention in this instance. These pictures showed a blonde woman that looked like Joanna. She had on a pink top that looked similar to the one that Joanna had been discovered wearing. Additionally, similar to how Joanna was discovered on Longwood Lane, her top is pulled up over her bra in these photos, revealing her breasts. Vincent is 33 years old when the trial starts on October 4th, 2011. He admits to killing Joanna during his trial, but he claims it was an accident. As a result, he is merely guilty of manslaughter and not murder because he had no intention of killing or gravely hurting her. He said that on the evening of December 17th, Joanna, who was by then essentially a stranger to him, asked him to her flat for a drink, and he entered. She made a flirtatious remark about him. She cried out when he attempted to kiss her, so he covered her lips with his left hand and wrapped his right arm over her neck to stop her screaming. And she passed away in 20 seconds. Nothing happened, not even a struggle. And that was all an odd mishap. He claims that after that, in a panic, he placed her body in his boot and dumped it on Longwood Lane. But the prosecution presented an entirely different scenario, and this story did not match the evidence. The story told by Joanna's body was totally different. According to the prosecution, he observed her returning home on December 17th. He'd acknowledged his attraction to her. He was aware that she would spend the weekend by herself at home, like Chris Jefferies, the landlord, might have mentioned something in passing, I think. And so that evening, a few minutes after she arrived home, he came up with a pretext to go knock on her door. And this would have been their first encounter, am I correct? When Joanna opens the door, he overwhelms her, follows her into the hallway, and attacks her. He towered over Joanna by a full foot, or 30 centimeters. He then overpowers her by using his height to pin her to the ground by her wrists. At this point, a struggle breaks out as she fights back. And there's also where she sustains the 43 injuries to her hands, torso, and head. He also has several scratches and injuries on his arms and hands that appear to be defensive wounds. And when questioned about how he obtained these, he claimed he couldn't recall. Based on Vincent's own account, there was almost an hour between the time he went to attack Joanna and the time he placed her body in his boot. This gave the prosecution the impression that she died gradually and painfully following the crime. After that, he carried Joanna's body back to his apartment and placed it in the boot of his bicycle after covering it up. He then took a car to an Asda grocery store. He entered, bought some beer and chips, and texted his girlfriend Tanya, "I've just bought crisps, I'm so bored," all the while keeping Joanna's body in the trunk of his car, as if he were a next-level sticker. He just killed a woman, and the body is in his boot. He's buying PR, crisps, and is texting his sweetheart, saying things like, "Hey, I'm sorry. I purchased some snacks to pass the time since I'm bored." After that, he returns to his residence. After about 20 minutes, he exits and puts Joanna's body in the snow near Longwood Lane. Blood is found on the wall next to the spot where her body was deposited, suggesting that he attempted to push her body over the wall, but was unable. Additionally, the prosecution claimed that this was a planned strike. He was proficient at his work. He was not in a panic. He remained in control. He acted with great calculation, and he showed that he could hide his. In reality, he conducted numerous searches related to the crime after it happened. Additionally, in the weeks that followed, he looked up the collection date for the local trash pickup on Google Maps of Longwood Lane. He searched up murder and manslaughter punishments. He looked up the distinction between manslaughter and murder on Google. He also looked up what sexual assault meant on Google. He kept checking the Avon and Somerset Police website for any new developments regarding the case. He did some research on the process of bodily decomposition. He did some research on forensic identification and analysis procedures. Additionally, he liked to search up Joanna's name and case updates. He would alternate between pornographic websites and that. Therefore, it was evident that he was enjoying the killing of Joanna. Everyone who knew him after the murder reported that he was acting entirely normally, as if he had no regrets at all. His actions would not have suggested to any of them that he was involved in this. He even attended a friend's dinner party. He also began making jokes about the investigation at this dinner party, claiming to have remarked something along the lines of the murderer having to be a distant, insane person. While the inquiry was underway, it was also revealed that on the night of Joanna's murder, he had admitted to the police that he had eaten pizza. The likelihood that this is the Tesco pizza Joanna bought is low, and the receipt she created at home to pay for it is missing. It honestly grosses me out to think of this man, like going home and cooking up that pizza and eating it, but I'd say the chances are quite good. As the trial was coming to a conclusion, Vincent dumped her body and admitted to the jury that he had considered suicide twice. "Oh, I am very sorry." He also stated, "I'm sorry for putting you through a week of hell," in an apology to Joanna's parents, following their daughter's strangling. After the trial concluded on October 28th, the jury returned its verdict, finding Vincent Tabak guilty of Joanna Yeates' murder by a vote of 10-2. He was given a life sentence with a minimum of 20 years in jail. There has never been a clear explanation given for this decision. Vincent never provided an explanation. He has never acknowledged the issue at all, only to unintentionally kill her via manslaughter. However, it is evident from his search history and other things that theories suggested this was a 2015 opportunistic murder with sexual motivations. In addition, he faced numerous sexual crime charges because of the child pornography discovered on his computer. And for this, he was given an additional 10 months. However, this case would be resolved in tandem with his 2017 murder conviction. He will now have a comfortable life behind bars after being transferred from a maximum security jail to a lower-risk prison in Winchester in 2022. He did attempt to apply to relocate to the Netherlands, where it would have been more likely that parole would be granted following his 20-year minimum sentence, but happily, this application was rejected. However, in 2031, he will be qualified for parole. But in this particular circumstance, that is all. I'll end it here for today. As usual, I'd love to hear your opinions in the obscured comments section. This story really terrifies me because anyone could have been the victim. Anyone who lived in Vincent's building or had a weird neighbor is the target. A girl who spent that Friday night alone at home. They might have been responsible, plus the fact that he was also in a relationship. I wonder what kind of person he was at home, or whether she suspected that he was weird, or that, while on a business trip in California, he was getting in touch with prostitutes. I wonder if she knew anything about his personality. The idea that there are only men and people like them in the wild, and that anyone could be residing next to them or in the same building as them, is just terrifying. I am incredibly saddened for Joanna's family and her partner, Greg. They appeared to be such a content couple.